a superstorm.
It really was the worst that nature delivers in storms.
It's the most famous city in the world.
8.5 million people. What could possibly go wrong?
And leaves devastation.
I'm thinking, how many homes are we going to lose? How many people are we going to lose?
Using scientific analysis.
The forecast was done as best as it could, but it still underestimated the scale of the storm surge.
The men who run New York.
This is worse than my worst fear. The water from the Hudson River was flowing down into the Battery Tunnel.
10 networks went simultaneously.
An eyewitness testimony.
They all just exploded from the wind like a bomb went off.
I see that wave coming around the corner every night when I go to sleep, and it's just not a good feeling.
This film plots the critical moments of an assault by one of nature's most powerful storms on one of the most sophisticated cities in the world.
There's no system that's bulletproof. There's no system that is impenetrable.
New York, one of the most famous cities in the world. 8.2 million people crowded into just 321 square miles. A giant metropolis underpinned by a complex and crowded network of essential services. None more important than the city's 108-year-old subway system.
The New York City subway system is quite unique. It works 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. New Yorkers are used to being able to go down into the subway system and be able to get a train any time of the day or night, any holiday, whenever, and they expect it to happen.
Often using the same tunnels as the subway, electrical power is delivered to the city's inhabitants by one of the most sophisticated networks of power grids in the world. In 6 days' time, New York, the city that never sleeps, will be plunged into darkness.
We haven't had shortages of electricity. We've not had rolling blackouts. So basically, we've been able to keep up with the demand of the city. What our customers want is to turn the switch and for the lights to go on.
New York's entire infrastructure, petrol stations, cash machines, transportation and power, normally running 24/7, is about to face the onslaught of the biggest Atlantic hurricane in history. About 1,500 miles to the southeast in the Caribbean Sea, a hurricane is forming. In 5 days' time, it will write itself into New York's history books.
Hurricanes are systems that are born in the tropics, and they need to have 26 degrees Celsius, approximately 80 degrees Fahrenheit water, to get the systems going.
Air heated by the ocean rises up into the sky. This moist ocean air forms huge clouds. Air rushes in to fill the void, and a cycle of circulation from bottom to top and back begins. This huge volume of circulating air is sitting above the rotating Earth. Air accelerates towards the low-pressure center of the storm and interacts with the spin of the Earth, causing the winds to turn anti-clockwise. This is the birth of a hurricane. Following the strict international protocol for naming such phenomena, she is given a name: Sandy.
The names for hurricanes are decided well in advance, several years in advance. There's a list. The first one has a name beginning with A, the next one a name beginning with B. And so this year S came up and S was allocated to the name Sandy.
Sandy's first victims are the Caribbean islands of Haiti and Jamaica. In Jamaica, wind speeds reach 80 miles an hour. 50 people die in Haiti alone. Most Atlantic hurricanes follow one of two paths. Some veer northwest across the Gulf of Mexico, like Hurricane Katrina, which breached the sea defenses of New Orleans. Others head due north, eventually falling off to the east into the cold waters of the North Atlantic. Deprived of the warm water that powers them, they die. But Sandy's destiny is to take an altogether different path, bringing her into conflict with one of the best-known cities in the world. 4,600 miles away from Jamaica, in Reading, England, European meteorologists are processing data from the hurricane with increasing anxiety.
The conventional wisdom said that Sandy would move towards the northeast and then it would die and not affect land. But there were suggestions that the hurricane might not behave in the normal way and might actually, instead of turning to the northeast, it might turn towards the northwest.
When the European Center model came out, the reaction was, this is a really dangerous possibility, but it's so far in advance, we're going to just have to watch this.
The European prediction is based on an advanced forecasting model. To hit New York, Sandy will have to experience a highly unusual sequence of meteorological events. There's a once-in-a-lifetime chance of her becoming that perfect storm and attacking the coast. "600 miles south of Florida, and Sandy swings north by northwest towards the east coast of the US. The Europeans were the first to predict an east coast landfall. Now, 48 hours later, US forecasters begin to reach the same conclusion.
In yellow, the American computer model keeps it off the coast and eventually hooks it into New England. The European model, which historically is the more accurate of the two long range, by Sunday keeps it close to the East Coast, and then early on Monday brings it into the Delmarva Peninsula south of New Jersey. Which
people start to think, okay, what if this happens? And I think in this case, day after day, the forecasts continued to say the same thing. This storm looks like it's going to take this weird left turn and come straight into the most populated area of the United States.
Atlantic hurricanes rarely turn west and head directly inland. Seasoned storm chasers like Scott McPartland can hardly believe their luck.
Yeah, well, I want to go to one of these side streets. We should go to another vantage point. Like, try to get down and shoot this way.
On the forecast models, there were hints that there could be a very powerful storm in the mid-Atlantic and Northeast around Halloween 2012. So we started to pay attention, but we really didn't take it too seriously in the beginning because the scenario itself was very outlandish. What some of the forecast models were showing had never actually materialized, and this literally would be a worst-case scenario.
The National Hurricane Center is based in Miami, Florida. It issues a likely impact warning to the city authorities. One of the first people to respond is Joe Loader, chairman of New York's Transit Authority and the boss of its entire subway tunnel system.
On the Thursday before was our very first meeting where we actually thought that Hurricane Sandy, was going to actually reach New York. There were all kinds of estimations, and meteorologists will tell you this and tell you that, but every one of them was consistent that we were going to get a surge in New York.
I was skeptical initially, like a good New Yorker would be. But 4 or 5 days out, the model seemed to converge, and they didn't budge. They kept coming with high tides, high winds.
Sandy leaves the Caribbean behind, skirting past the Florida Panhandle. By now, she is almost 450 miles across. She is about to take a critical step that could only have happened under very unusual environmental conditions.
In a traditional hurricane season, there's a high-pressure system that kind of lives over Bermuda. It's called the Bermuda High. And generally speaking, Atlantic systems will kind of come along the bottom side of that high and then kind of curve around it and move its way back out into the eastern Atlantic. Whereas Sandy, once it started moving north, it couldn't move east. That Bermuda High was not there.
With no Bermuda High to repel her, Sandy heads relentlessly northwards, parallel to the east coast of the States. Though Sandy is still 240 miles off the US coast, her storm-force waves and winds batter Miami and North Carolina, knocking out highways and causing huge damage to property. The Gulf Stream is a narrow ocean current that carries warm water from the Gulf of Mexico up and across the Atlantic towards Europe. This year, it is 3 degrees hotter than normal. Sandy sucks in the Gulf Stream's extra heat, boosting her power. This proves to be a critical moment on her rendezvous with destruction. Concern about Sandy's progress is mounting. NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, decides to take a closer look at the storm. They scramble a spotter plane to fly directly into her eye, where this footage was shot. On the plane is Dr. Alexander McDonald, ironically known to his friends as Sandy.
NOAA has an aircraft called the P-3 Orion, and it's a very strong aircraft. It has 4 engine turboprops, so it's kind of built to go into hurricanes at levels like 12,000 feet, where the hurricane is can be pretty dicey. It can really throw you around at that level.
Right in front of Dr. McDonald's eyes, his namesake is about to transform herself into a superstorm.
Sandy is still very tropical, rolling up the eastern seaboard, feeding off of the Gulf Stream waters, really having a very nice tropical time. As we roll into the 28th of October, the jet stream is starting to dive underneath it, and Sandy is starting to expand and lose its tropical characteristics.
The water temperature is becoming insufficient to power the hurricane. It should begin to fade, but it doesn't.
This is the critical point. This is the transition period.
But from his vantage point in the eye of the hurricane, Dr. McDonald is astonished to see Sandy combining with a second storm.
It had been a fairly normal Category 1 hurricane which had come across Cuba, but as it came north, there was what we call a nor'easter.
A nor'easter is a large storm front. This one has been developing inland of the East Coast, parallel to Sandy's track north.
A nor'easter is a storm that can be 500 or 700 miles across. It's not 30 miles across, it's 500 or 700 miles.
Dr. McDonald watches as Hurricane Sandy begins to combine with the nor'easter.
This storm was really going into a process of becoming both kinds of storms. It had the big size, the huge rains, and right in the center of it, it had those super strong winds and super low pressure. So it really was a combination of the worst that nature delivers in storms, two put together.
Nor'easters don't need warm seas below them to sustain their power. They're carried by high-altitude winds. By combining with the nor'easter, Sandy has morphed into a seemingly unstoppable and rare natural phenomenon. This new hybrid storm draws all the power it needs from the winds above. By this point, Sandy's progress towards New York is unrelenting.
From a warm, very nice tropical eye to being torn apart to being cold on the inside.
Sandy is now everything the forecasters feared she would become. With Halloween just days away, news services give her an eerie nickname.
This morning, forecasters have found a new word to describe the potential impact of Hurricane Sandy on the East Coast. They're calling it Frankenstorm.
Conflict with the storm seems inevitable. New York shifts into emergency mode as it braces for impact. At hospitals throughout downtown New York, those in charge have some difficult decisions to make.
We had fear that as the storm developed, that we would not be able to bring new people in, new employees, new nurses, new doctors, housekeepers, engineers, food services. They were not going to be able to get to us. We had to make sure that we were going to have enough food to supply food to all of our employees for days, as well as all of our patients for days, as well as the patients that we didn't even have at that moment in time.
On Sunday morning, we were on a conference call with the National Weather Service, the National Hurricane Center. And the tone of their voice, the tone of the report they gave us on Sunday morning, sort of started to realize this was going to be as bad a storm as they had predicted all along that we were going to get hit with.
At 5:30 in the afternoon of the 28th of October, something happens that has only happened once before in 108 years. The MTA, the New York transportation system, begins shutdown.
It takes about 12 hours to completely shut down the New York City subway system. And we did not want to bring everybody into New York City on Monday and strand them here. So that's why we proposed the beginning of the shutdown of the subway system on Sunday night at 7 o'clock, and all of our assets were tied up and locked up and safe by 3 a.m. in the morning on Monday morning.
656 miles of track lie deserted, and 6,292 subway cars are parked up. The only time this has ever happened before was in 2011, as the city braced itself for the impact of a previous hurricane, Irene.
Hurricane Irene hit New York last year, and it was a hurricane all the way through it, and it didn't go through this change of a Frankenstorm or a hybrid storm. It was much smaller in size, and as it came on shore, not that much damage occurred.
Nobody really wanted to leave. Everybody kept referring to Irene the year before and past storms that they had been through, and there was a lot of complacency.
I have family and friends in New York and New Jersey area, and they were asking me, they said, well, is this going to be like Irene? Because we were fine with Irene. We didn't have any problems with Irene. And I had to respond to them saying, no, this is much bigger.
In light of these conditions, I'm going to sign an executive order mandating evacuation of Zone A areas. I'm also ordering that all of the city's public schools be closed on Monday.
Believing that Sandy would spare New York in the same way that Irene had a year earlier, many New Yorkers ignored Mayor Bloomberg's instructions to evacuate low-lying areas of the city. In less than 24 hours' time, the world would discover what a mistake that was. With 14 hours to landfall, Sandy has become the largest Atlantic hurricane in history. She runs headlong into a massive system of high pressure, which blocks her path. At this crucial moment, Sandy's encounter with this jet stream forces her to make a sharp left turn, straight towards New York. At 5 a.m. on October the 29th, all the forecasters' predictions come true. All doubt has now gone. Sandy will slam into New York by the end of the day.
All of our people were on 12-hour shifts, round the clock. Everyone, all of our substations and generating stations were staffed. Made sure that all the floodgates in our generating stations and substations were set up and prepared. I think they were designed for something like 12-foot-6 tides.
All air traffic in and out of New York and New Jersey is grounded. At 7:41 a.m., the New York Stock Exchange is closed for the first time since 9/11. Sandy is 310 miles from New York, and the water is already washing over the edges of lower Manhattan. This is the beginning of what's known as a storm surge, a wave of high water created by storm force winds.
The wind is actually stacking the water up on top of itself and forcing it to pile up. And once that pile of water makes landfall, it has nowhere to go except onto the land.
The storm surge wave is expected to reach New York at high tide.
Worst case scenario, that the tide couldn't be higher. So it came in right at high tide during a full moon, record storm surge with incredible winds. Everything that could possibly add to sea level height and surge did.
The city now has two enemies: high water and high winds. Storm chaser Scott McPartland is in one of New York's outer boroughs, Queens.
Well, we first left the house about 11 o'clock in the morning on Monday, the day of the storm, and we traveled right up to Whitestone, Queens. When we got there, the water was already pouring over the seawall. It was inundating neighborhoods, it was already in people's backyards, already in people's homes at this point. When I saw this taking place, and it was still so early in the day, and we knew that the worst of the storm was still many hours away, that's when it really started to set in that this storm was really going to be as bad as everybody said it was going to be.
By early afternoon, wind speeds rise to over 90 miles per hour as Sandy accelerates. Scott is tracking Sandy's path.
Got over to Rockaway Bridge, and it was right about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And the first thing I noticed was how much water had already come in. The water at this point at Rockaway Beach was already hitting the boardwalk. The storm surge is winning already. It was the first time that I could remember that the ocean really scared me. Seeing the water in that state, it was white water. You could feel the entire boardwalk shaking as you're standing on it.
All along the eastern coast, people are oblivious to the danger.
At this point, there were still people wandering walking their dogs. I think at this point, most people did understand how serious this was, but there still seemed to be a few that didn't get it.
Rockaway is a popular beachfront resort in the evacuation zone. Like many of her neighbors, Shatisha Hayward decides to stay put with her 6 children.
I kept saying to myself, please don't let this roof just fly off, because you can hear the house as the side of it started to fall off. You can hear the wind rocking back and forth, and the windows, this was like a whistle. We started rocking, and I'm like, okay, this is feeling more like an earthquake. And then the lights start to flicker on and off. Then they went off. They came back on, and then around 5:30, they were completely out, and it was dark. It was just like, Mom, the lights went off, turn the lights back on. And I'm like, I can't turn the lights back on.
7 miles down the road, the blue-collar community of Breezy Point is bracing itself for impact. The volunteer fire crew have been preparing for days to defend the 15% of residents who've chosen not to evacuate.
We had purchased food, we had sleeping gear. Our plan was to hunker down here and shelter in place and make sure the trucks, batteries, the water, gas, everything was at prime.
But they're completely unprepared for the scale of the tidal surge that is hitting the East Coast.
At 5:30, the tidal surge came, and that was 2.5, 3 hours before moon high tide, and the water never stopped coming.
There it is, huge storm surge, live. Hey, buddy, here we go. Oh my gosh, here it comes, Jeremy. 6 inches, a foot of water. Just come over the barrel, here we go.
When I tell you the storm hit, like like a bolt of lightning, it came down and it just washed everything away.
The fire crew are forced to abandon the station and move to their clubhouse on higher ground.
And the water kept coming, and unbelievably, it came and started flooding the clubhouse. We had a marble floor in there. It was bubbling up through the seams by the marble, and we were 3 hours away from high tide, and we knew we were in for an interesting evening.
New York is vulnerable because the shape of its coastline magnifies the storm surge. The entrance to the city's harbor sits in an elbow between Long Island and New Jersey. This acts like a funnel, slamming the waves right up against Staten Island, South Queens, and into the harbor.
There's a second opening, and that's through the East River that connects to Long Island Sound. Long Island Sound is shaped like a funnel, and winds push this water, they surge this water into western Long Island Sound, and that squirts through the East River into New York Harbor. So New York Harbor is getting surges from 2 directions at once, and that's what makes it particularly fearsome.
Experts have made huge strides in accurately predicting the path of hurricanes. The science of the surges that come with them is less well understood.
Issues such as storm surge are still a fundamental area of research. The improvements have not been that great over the last 10 years or so. The forecast was in error. The forecast was done as best as it could, but it still underestimated the scale of the storm surge.
The landfall of Sandy is still 2 hours away, but New Yorkers are already feeling its impact. On the Rockaways and across the region, the surge inundates the streets.
It got darker, the water started to rise, and my 14-year-old son, he came and he said, "Mom, the water is over Dad's car." So I'm like, no, the water can't be over Dad's car. When I looked out the window, the water was over my husband's car. You can hear people screaming, "Help." It was like a nightmare, like a pitch black movie.
In Lower Manhattan, officials from the electricity company are watching floodwater as it encroaches on vital systems close to the global financial center of Wall Street.
Around 7 or 8 o'clock, we got the word that they're being overcome and that the water is getting into the underground system.
New York's power is divided into 64 networks. In Manhattan, the bulk of these systems are in basements or buried in the streets.
If you open up the streets of New York, you would see what looks like a copper mine. There is so many cables. We've got now salt water combining with live electricity. And that's a really bad combination. It was very tense, and we were now in this mode where we were going to have to pull the plug on these networks. This preemptive shutdown, it kind of goes against our nature to shut things down when our nature is to keep things running.
For the first time in its history, power is switched off on the world's biggest financial center, Wall Street.
We knew how important it was and the global impact that it would have.
On Staten Island, it's the storm, not the power company, that has plunged this community into darkness. Power is failing erratically across the region.
I stayed till about 7:30, 8 o'clock, tried moving cars up a few blocks that way. By the time I came back here to get dry clothes out of the house, the water was probably up to here on me. It was like a tidal wave. Boom, in.
Michael Clark's parents, Linda and Bob, live around the corner. Like many in the evacuation zones, they're reluctant to abandon the family home.
We have 2 dogs and a cat. And he said, oh, and chickens. He had 2 chickens, which I think he's worried about more than anything. But
doing a backstroke.
He said, oh, I think we'll stay. I think we'll stay.
When Linda finally makes a run for it, it's too late.
I put the key in the ignition and I looked up and I saw a wave of water coming around Cedar Grove Avenue. And I said, oh my God. And I went to get out of the car because I realized it wasn't going to start. And the wave hit the car and I had to push my way out of the car because the water was coming against the door. And I tried to make it to the back of the house. The water was pushing me away. I was screaming. Bob came running out and he pulled me up. He helped me get up the stairs. He pulled me out of the water. And we ran for the bedroom because he said, we have to get in the attic. We have to get in the attic.
In the New York Fire Department Operations Center, 911 calls from Staten Island are lighting up the board.
People were calling that they were trapped. Just dealing alone with Staten Island would have been enough for the department without anything else going on. So that was another point of concern for me in that Staten Island was really, really being wiped out. I live on Staten Island, so my family was there.
In the rest of the city, neighborhoods that are on higher ground are spared the worst of the storm.
I was listening to the news and hearing about what was coming to the areas on the shore and realizing this seemed like it was going to be a substantial storm. But I didn't have any real concerns for our safety or comfort in where we were in Brooklyn.
Marsha's 24-year-old son, Jake, decides to go out and see a friend.
When Jake said he was going out, and I knew they kept saying the peak of the storm will be in 40 minutes. I said, Jake, I don't think this is a really good time to be going out. And he said, well, Jesse needs me to come over. And that was it. I mean, Jesse needed him, and he went.
At 8:11 p.m. on October the 29th, the eye of Superstorm Sandy hits the coast of New Jersey.
Once the eye makes its way onto land, that's the most intense part of the system. The eye wall is where all that energy and wind energy is at.
Guy Ferraro is on the Jersey shore. Wind speeds now are almost 100 miles per hour.
A wind came through here like I've never seen. Sounded like a train coming. I had like 10 sliding doors all in a line in the back. They all just exploded from the wind like a bomb went off. And then minutes later, the whole roof went up in the air. It was like a Wizard of Oz. There was 2 big boats my friend had here. They were just motoring right down the middle of the street. Faster than I would ever imagine. I bet you those boats were doing 20 miles an hour. I called my wife. I told her that I was sorry that I didn't leave and that I wasn't sure I was going to get out of this one. You know, I really didn't know.
Back in the Rockaways in New York, Shatisha Hayward is now trapped by floodwaters with her 6 children. She's calling 911.
We got a voicemail, and it was saying, you know, everybody call is important, you know, leave a message, but I wasn't leaving no message. This is 911. So I was able to get on Twitter, and, you know, I tweeted, and, you know, I was like, you know, a huge shout out to the FDNY.
At the Fire Department Control Center, Press Officer Emily Raheny is inundated with desperate tweets for help.
I started getting a lot of tweets from people who said they did not have phone service. A lot of them still had some connectivity with their phones to something like Twitter, and so that was just their way of reaching out somehow to get to somebody to help them.
Amongst the thousands of tweets, Shatisha's caught her eye.
She and her 6 boys were trapped in their house. Floodwaters were rushing in, and she was really panicked. She didn't want to see her children in danger. And I knew I had to do something to help, so I started calling fire department dispatchers.
In Manhattan, the Hudson River has breached its banks and is flooding the streets. At 8:30, it pours into a critical electrical substation. Salt water hits 13,000-volt cables.
We got the report from our East 13th Street substation and that there was a failure. With that explosion, 10 networks went simultaneously, which basically took out everything from 34th Street down to the Battery, almost half of this island.
Lower Manhattan goes dark.
Would never think this was happening in New York. So the best way to deal with now is just not panic. People just gotta stay civil.
Backup generators switch on in the 4 hospitals in the blackout zone. But only one of them manages to keep the lights on.
When you're on emergency power, all you need is one generator to fail, and suddenly you're attempting to practice medicine in the dark.
You opened up the doors, and you looked down First Avenue, you looked up First Avenue, you looked across the street. There was nothing. We were the only light. We were the beacon of hope for this entire region of New York City.
The Irish-American community in Breezy Point is also in the dark, and facing a different problem. A fire starts in one home and quickly spreads across the neighborhood.
At one point, the entire sky was just lit up in the reddest, orangest color you could ever imagine. I called my mom, and she was hysterical on the phone. She was like, just say a prayer. It was a very emotional time. I didn't know how I was gonna get out.
Trapped by rising water on all sides, the firemen can do nothing about the blaze.
The embers was softball size. When they'd hit the water, you hear it pop, an explosion. And it was actually a beautiful scene. It looked like a meteor strike.
"9:30 p.m. In parts of Manhattan, waves are reaching record heights of 25 feet above sea level. Water begins to pour into the subway tunnels. MTA chief Joe Loader sees his network overwhelmed.
This is worse than my worst fear. The water from the Hudson River was flowing down into the Battery Tunnel. There were white rapids. It sounded like a waterfall. Each tunnel had 43 million gallons of water. Over 6,000 feet, more than a mile, filled with water. Floor to ceiling, side to side, completely filled up.
At the fire department command post, trouble is coming from every direction.
But I got a 6-alarm fire in Breezy Point. I got tons of people trapped in the water. I got a fire on City Island. I got people in Gerritsen Beach calling that they're trapped. I got people in Lower Manhattan that have no power. There were so many other things going on to keep us busy.
At 11 p.m., the firefighters in Breezy Point make it back to their flooded station.
Miraculously, even though these trucks were underwater, they did start up. Once we started driving, the firemen stayed with the trucks, and we started rescuing other people.
I saw the flashlight going back and forth. They were like, the fire's coming this way. You need to get out of here. It's not safe anymore. When I finally got up to the firehouse, my dad was up there, and he just saw me and grabbed me and didn't let go.
This is the biggest residential fire in New York for over 100 years.
I got on the radio, voice elevated. I said, I need backup, I need backup.
I'm thinking, could we lose all of Breezy Point? And then I'm worried about my firefighters as well, knowing they got chest-deep water, hurricane-force winds feeding this fire. I'm thinking, how many homes are we going to lose? How many people are we going to lose? How many firefighters are going to get injured or killed?
In Rockaway, firefighters alerted by her tweets rescue Shatisha Hayward and her children. Her husband finally manages to get through to her.
And I said, we're safe, we're fine, we're on a boat. And he was like, a boat? What do you mean you're on a boat? And we joke a lot. So he basically was like, Shatisha, I'm really not playing with you at this time. So I kept saying to myself, I'm like, babe, I'm really not joking. Like, I'm so serious. We're on a boat.
Across the eastern seaboard, more than 4 million homes are in the dark. In New Jersey, Guy Ferraro has been trapped in a half-sunk car for nearly 5 hours.
The tide was going out, and by then my legs were completely numb. I couldn't feel them at all. I was only in pajamas at that point. I waited until I saw the police lights. And I knew that I couldn't stand the cold too much longer. And I knew I could get across that road. It was just bedlam here. People screaming for hours and hours and hours for help, you know.
Sandy's chaos extends to Manhattan's transport system. 7 subway tunnels are flooded to the roof. The emergency services are now receiving 20,000 911 calls every hour. In Staten Island, Michael Clark has heard nothing from his parents for hours. Reaching them by car is impossible.
Call my friend Brian. I said, Brian, you got a boat, get something, do something, get down here.
I kept saying to Bob, Bob, is the water coming up more? Because I was afraid that it was going to come up so high and there was no way out of the attic. But he kept saying, no, Linda, it's not coming up, it's not. I go, Bob, I think it's going to come up and we're going to drown. And he said, no, be calm, we're not going to drown, we're going to get out.
I had a little tiny flash, I could see 2 foot in front of me, that was it. And when it's dark, you know? I mean, you don't realize how lucky you are that you have streetlights in your neighborhood.
I can do whatever you want.
Banging on my mother's door and hearing their voice, it was like hitting the lottery. My mother looked at me and said, what the hell are you doing here? So.
I just started crying hysterical.
I said, you're nuts, Michael. What are you doing here? He said, come to you were Mom. You didn't call. I said, okay, I can't. I'm not going to call. The phone's broke. I drowned in it. That was that.
I mean, what else could you do? So anybody would do it for the parents, right?
When daylight came, the severe and widespread damage from Hurricane Sandy was painfully clear. In lower Manhattan, which would normally be bustling, it was eerily calm.
It was hard to believe. This is not normal damage. This is just something that is almost catastrophic.
Lower Manhattan, Jersey Shore, and Staten Island are like war zones. Sandy has now killed at least 10 people in the USA. The numbers continue to rise as rescuers pick through the devastation.
You can see the foundation right here. Right in. You can see everything underneath here. All the water, the pipes broke up there.
Coastal communities have almost been wiped out. 8 million homes and businesses across 17 US states are without power. Landlines and mobile signals are down, making contact with relatives difficult. On Staten Island, retired firefighter Neil Filipowicz heads out early to Fox Beach Avenue. He's looking for big brother Flip and nephew John, who stayed to protect their home.
The wall on one side was pushed in. All the cinder blocks were missing of the foundation, and I saw the water, and I said, wow, that this house got really destroyed, you know. I made my way down the basement, and it was completely pitch black down there. I was calling them, but I didn't have a flashlight, and like I said, it was completely dark. So I went back inside the house, and I was talking to Mike, the neighbor, and he said, you know, his name Neil, you know, his wallet's here, his keys, and his utility knife, which he always carried. And I'm like, I said, wow, you know, they must have been evacuated real quick. I immediately thought, you know, he's got to be in one of these shelters. So I said, let me go pick up my sister-in-law, John's wife, and her mother. And I said, let's take a ride.
Neil's family could be anywhere. Tens of thousands are homeless, packed into temporary shelters. Hospitals are inundated. Across town in North Brooklyn, Marsha Sikowitz still hasn't heard from her son, Jacob.
I just started calling his cell phone every 15 minutes, which I knew didn't make a whole lot of sense, but I didn't know what else to do. And finally, a man answered his phone, and I said, "Where's my son?" I thought maybe he had been mugged, or, you know, why was this man answering his phone? I said, "Where's my son?" And he said, "What's your address?" And I said, "Where's my son?" And he said, "This is Detective Simon. Tell me your address. I'm coming over to your apartment."
Jake and his best friend Jesse had been killed by a falling tree at 8 p.m. the previous evening. It took the overwhelmed emergency services nearly 12 hours to recover their bodies.
One of my neighbors said there was a disturbance in the force. You know, the force of goodness of Jake and Jesse. Somehow there was a disturbance, like God looked away for a second and something terrible happened.
Neil Filipowicz spends hours searching for his brother and nephew.
A bunch of people said, I didn't see Flip. So at that point, my sister-in-law became very alarmed. She said, he's not in touch with us. He's not in a shelter. There's got to be something wrong.
Neil returns to his brother's damaged home, looking for clues.
Like I said, when I came in, I didn't get very far, and I panned from this way here around with a good flashlight that I had, and I went to the left, and I saw on this area right here a hand, and I was praying, please let that be a doll's hand, you know. I reached in my right hand and I pulled up, and I could see my brother's face, and right behind it was my nephew's. And they came up together out of the water, and I seen my brother had his other hand, his right hand, around his back, and my nephew was holding him around the waist with his head buried, like in his chest. And I could only think that they knew they were going to die, and they just grabbed a hold of each other, and, you know, and to say, you know, I got you. There's no words to describe that feeling, because, like I said, he was my idol, and little John was a prince that didn't deserve to die like that, you know. A man's home is his castle, you know, and my brother was the king of that castle.
Across the bay at Breezy Point in Queens, residents are discovering the true extent of the fire damage. 111 of 2,800 homes have been consumed by the flames. Incredibly, not a single person has died, owing much to the efforts of local volunteer firefighters.
Pulling up to the scene on the south edge and seeing the flames just in the sky, and then walking into the fire. That memory will never leave. And seeing my men, you know, just unrestrained and motivated without any fear, and so dedicated to others and not themselves. It's so outstanding. I'm so proud of them.
The city is paralyzed.
It wasn't just the subway system that was damaged. We actually, on the Metro North Railroad, the Hudson River came up. We actually had a 40-foot boat across our tracks. We didn't know at that point, we had no idea of the severity of the situation. We knew it was bad, but we just didn't know how bad it was.
These were underground rivers. These tunnels became underground rivers. When I came down here, and all I saw was a wall of water. I said, holy cow. I could never imagine to see that much in my lifetime here, which is over almost 20 years. I've never seen anything this bad.
New Jersey has been hit hardest. The amusement park is submerged by the surf. Miles of historic boardwalk destroyed. 5,000 people are in shelters. In Lower Manhattan, electricity company Con Edison must jumpstart power, even though parts of the system are still immersed in salt water.
These folks are working with high voltage, high pressure, high temperature, heavy machinery. It is dangerous work on any day. When you have these hazards that are superimposed on the routine hazards, it is just, it can be a very dangerous combination.
Fuel is in short supply. Food deliveries are struggling to get in. New York's success was founded on its integrated infrastructure. But without power, the city's systems unravel.
We tend to take for granted that our phones are going to work, water's going to come out of the tap, the lights are going to come on when we flick a switch. And events like Sandy do bring home to us the fact that if those things don't work, we can be very vulnerable.
The heavy reliance on single transportation networks, the heavy dense concentration of power plants and other facilities along the coast, the fact that there's so much interlinking between these economic sectors, which actually is very valuable from the standpoint of productivity, is also the thing that can create vulnerability, because when one piece goes down, it's a link that disappears.
New Yorkers wait 2 days for just part of the subway network to restart.
We do have some escalators. They're shot, but the stairs still work just fine, and you can get down quite easily. It wreaked havoc in certain parts of the system, but not such havoc that it's completely and totally destroyed, because the subway system is relatively simple. Staircase, hole in the ground, another staircase, and it just keeps going and going, so we can make the city as mobile and move everyone around as quickly as we possibly can.
People are in darkness for 4 days before power is restored.
We have always felt that we had the most reliable electric system in the world, and we certainly had its Achilles heel hurt in this storm.
Whilst the lights come back on in Manhattan, outlying areas like Staten Island are still without power. Many residents feel unsupported given the scale of the catastrophe.
Nobody was here the first day, day after, even the third day to have that response. It was quite disgusting in plain English. The neighbors and everybody you see here were the first responders before anybody. But, I guess this is what it is. I guess the environment's changing, and, something we're going to have to prepare for in the future.
A lot of people want to discuss Sandy in the context of climate change. And while we are experiencing climate change, we still don't know the impacts on current weather. We have seen a spate of strange weather events in this year. Whether we can attribute that to climate change or not probably requires more research.
Expert opinion is divided on whether New York will face more frequent and destructive hurricanes in the future.
We know we're locked into up to a metre of sea level rise by 2100. And therefore, there is a small but finite chance of storm surge heights which are greater than those experienced during Hurricane Sandy.
There is no guarantee of safety for those who choose to rebuild as before.
People want to rebuild their lives. They want to go back to the place, and quite reasonably, we then tend to put things back in the places that they were prior to the event. In other words, into places of risk.
New York will have to rethink the vulnerabilities of its infrastructure.
As someone said once, when there's an airplane accident, one doesn't simply say, let's go back and put the same wing on.
There's no system that's bulletproof. There's no system that is impenetrable. There's only a couple of possibilities. Make it submersible or raise it up above where the tides can get to, or maybe some combination of those things.
Professor Malcolm Bowman is an expert on storm surges and has an audacious solution.
The time has come for a series of storm surge barriers to protect New York, northern New Jersey, and parts of western Long Island Sound from this ever happening again.
The barriers would take decades to build and cost at least $10 billion.
It would protect the communities of Breezy Point that were destroyed in the storm, protect the south coast of Staten Island, all of New Jersey. This is a serious proposal that the city now should investigate.
A ray of hope during this disaster was that astonishingly accurate weather forecasting models gave people the opportunity to evacuate before the storm hit.
The number of lives that were lost, as catastrophic as they were, would have been even worse without those specific activities to move people out of the way of flooding. So I think this is a landmark event in how the nation understands and responds to weather events.
Sandy killed 203 people in the Caribbean, the USA, and Canada. Her destruction in the US alone could cost $50 billion. One of the most expensive hurricanes in US history.
Well, this first round, I have to say, at least on points, goes to Sandy. I mean, we are New Yorkers, so we're never knocked out, but so we get right back up. But I mean, she inflicted some damage in the first round.
New York City is recovering fast, but it won't be so easy for the survivors.
I'll tell you right now, even before this, my outlook on it, Mother Nature rules. It's one thing you don't screw with, the water. Water, wind, it all rules over us.
I don't know if we could go through what we just went through again. It is enough for a lifetime. I see that wave coming around the corner every night when I go to sleep, and it's just not a good feeling.
They say 100-year storm. I don't think so anymore. I think they're going to be a little more often than we expect.
As time passes, hurricane names get reused, except for those whose deadly reputations are burnt into the history books. There will never be another hurricane named Sandy.
Next this evening, we've comedy coming up with Never Mind the Buzzcocks at midnight, and that's after a little music next.